Good evening. Hi, my name is Samantha Reusch, and I'm the Research and Evaluations Manager at Apathy is Boring. So, the best argument against democracy, or so the saying goes, is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. This quote is quite popular, and not just because Winston Churchill maybe did, but also possibly didn't actually say it. I'm sure many of you have heard it, seen it, and you've maybe even shared it. Even if you haven't, as someone who's engaged in this work, I have to tell you, the sentiment is common, especially during elections. It pops up in memes, with snarky e-pundits on Twitter, and even in national news broadcasts. At Apathy is Boring, we work year-round to engage young people, our peers, in Canada's democracy. We believe principally in seeking out the voices of less engaged and less experienced youth and supporting them to join the conversation on issues that are important to them. As you might imagine, I don't love that quote, but I can't ignore that its popularity hints at a core issue with the way we collectively seem to think our democracy should work. The biggest problem, or so says the quote, is not, say, the degree to which a conversation about our political systems could potentially be inaccessible to the average voter, but rather the inconvenience we cause when we do try to engage with them. So I'd like to challenge the premise at the center of this issue. Why does the average voter only get 5 minutes? We tend to think of our democracy as a great equalizer, but a closer inspection reveals that actually it does a remarkably good job at replicating and perpetuating the inequities already deeply embedded in our society. Democracy and our electoral system has been used as justification for generations of oppression and violence, for colonialism, and for the exploitation of resources, peoples, and land. This manifests politically in whose voices are given disproportionate weight within decision-making processes, and within media, and within our broader narratives and conversations. Whose concerns and priorities are held up and given legitimacy? Whose are dismissed as inconsequential? And who is being told implicitly or explicitly, repeatedly, and sometimes violently, that their voice and their experience is not welcome, even for 5 minutes? Believe it or not, we do not come into this world prepared to engage in our political system. It takes time and education and mentorship to develop the required skills and knowledge. It takes networking and it takes connections. Young people here in Canada have been slowly withdrawing from our electoral system for the last 50 years. This is true across all Western democracies, in fact. And the decline is particularly pronounced in communities who face additional barriers, such as education and poverty and discrimination. While we won't know the voter turnout among young people in this most recent election for another few months, I can tell you that in the new class of MPs elected to the House of Commons, only about 50 of the 338 are under the age of 40. This is despite millennials and Gen Z being the largest segment of the voting population in this election. People like to speak often and loudly about how young people don't care, but 500,000 young people and their allies marching in the streets of Montreal this September for climate seem to suggest there's more to the story. We see every day in our work how young people are engaged by issues but often have few channels and limited power to have an impact on them. Research tells us that young people are actually neurologically hardwired for innovation. Young people will create new channels to have our voices heard when the old ones fail us. Channels that are not within the formal boundaries of our political systems, but instead outside, seeking to build influence and power to create impacts in other ways. Large-scale social movements, protests, creative activations, organizing, and community building are only a few ways young people engage, but few of us are actually entering into the halls of formal political power. We're at a pivotal moment for the survival of democracy on a global scale. Citizens feel a certain urgency and impatience with the ability of democracy to effectively respond to the greatest challenges of our time: inequality, poverty, climate injustice. As we become increasingly disengaged from the system and power becomes increasingly concentrated in the hands of the few, who is investing their time in our average voter? What about our average non-voter? Now's not the time to shut each other out, but rather to take the time to engage each other. maybe even especially when it's hard. Democracy is a tool, it's a process. Like any process, we get out of it what we put in. How can we ensure that this generation of leaders are ready to engage within this system? We need a movement towards youth-led democratic innovation. We need to acknowledge the power and knowledge held by young people and held by our average voters. We need new solutions, and we need fresh eyes if we have any hope to solve our biggest challenges, especially the ones that create barriers to our democratic ideals. We need those most impacted leading the way. Only then can we ensure that our democracy can effectively take care of and advocate on behalf of all those who make their homes here. This work is not just done during elections, but essentially between them as well. So I'm going to leave you with a different quote, and one that I like a lot more, by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Optimism and hope are not the same. Optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better, and hope is the belief that together we can make the world better. Our democracy doesn't need passive optimism, it needs hope and it needs hard work. It needs active and sustained investment in each other and in our collective future. Democracy starts locally. It starts with the way we treat each other, with how we engage each other around the issues in our communities. It starts with questions and it cooperates to build collective answers and compromise. It takes patience and it takes listening, but most importantly, it takes more than 5 minutes. Thank you.